looking to get into the One Piece card game, or just looking for what decks are available this format. Either way, this video is for you. I'll be going over the meta, price breakdowns, and finally, individual deck lists for meta decks, new player picks, and finally, just some decks that I think are neat. Here's a breakdown of One Piece's color pie, as well as a listing of the themes associated with each color. Red focuses on low cost and aggressive units, while also having synergies with events and Rest and Dawn. Green focuses on unit spam, and resting or unresting units. Blue focuses on card draw and non-KO removal. Blue is considered to be the best support color. Purple focuses on gaining extra Dawn and using Dawn as a cost. Purple has a lot of variety due to having heavier cost, but it tends to focus on late game options or anti-meta effects. Yellow is the color of life manipulation. Cards heal, pay life as a cost, or rearrange life. Yellow tends to be late game focused. Black is the color of KO based removal and graveyard recursion. The meta of this set features the color black being the best. As such, Gecko Moria and Sakazuki are dominating tournaments. They commonly take up more than 50% of top spots. In the previous format, Sakazuki alone could take up more than 70% of topping lists. Following this, yellow is the best color, having the decks Katakuri, Enel, and Yamato fight somewhat evenly amongst each other for the rogue spots. Lastly, every other deck has somewhat scattered tournament results. It doesn't mean they're bad, but they may take more skill or luck to pilot successfully. For a very general breakdown of deck power level, here's a stroke-inducing graphic depicting the strength of literally every deck in the game. I hope you got all that. Moving on. For a more specific breakdown of each individual deck's playstyle, here's a very rough guide of what general playstyle each deck falls into. This is subjective and changes a lot depending on the build. Before we get into individual decks, I want to set expectations regarding prices. To do that, here's a breakdown of card prices and common engines. Yellow is by far the most expensive, followed by the navy engine and black. Katakuri is an absolute nuke to affordability. Blue, on the other hand, is one of the cheapest colors. The other colors are a bit more spread out in price, especially since in green, you only tend to pick one of the staples and build around that. Green staples are expensive right now because speculators are buying out cards that will be used in the future deck Jewelry Bonnie. Red is cheap though. Here's a deck price breakdown of every relevant deck, plus every deck covered in this guide, so have fun with potentially having your dreams crushed. I have a friend who's a Perona simp who had his kneecaps broken when he saw the price tag. If you appreciate this style of breakdown, please do subscribe, because it takes a lot of hard work to put all this together. Let's start with the individual deck breakdowns. The meta decks here will be covered in order of which decks I believe are best. Without further ado, here's the best deck of the format, Sakazuki. Sakazuki has been the terror of the One Piece card game since his release in OP5, and he's likely to continue his reign of terror, at least until he very likely follows the Japanese side and gets banned. Sakazuki uses the before-mentioned Navy engine to effectively remove any units an opponent can play, while building a board and maintaining hand advantage. Great Eruption and Ice Age reduce costs for practically free. Radluci, Houndblaze, and Borsellino remove units and create pressure. Lastly, the deck has amazing graveyard recursion with Rebecca and Gecko Moria. It truly is one of the most versatile and powerful engines in the game. It's all tied together by Sakazuki's leader skill, enabling hand fixing, graveyard setup, and additional cost reduction. Absolutely insane deck that is the best choice in the game for competitive play. With tournament results the way they are, it is a tier 0 format around black decks with yellow options of secondary rogue decks. Sakazuki is currently about $350 for the core. It does change quite a bit depending on your ratios and techs. If you are serious about competitive play, this deck is my main recommendation, but be aware, it is a time bomb of banned cards. Gecko Moria is a secondary option in this black meta. It uses the same Navy engine to reduce unit costs and KO them efficiently. What makes Gecko Moria unique is the new recursion and control options created by Dr. Hogback, Absalom, and Perona. Perona is the most unique option, being able to rip cards from the opponent's hand, forcing them on their toes. Dr. Hogback provides another option for 2k counter recursion, and just other recursion options in general. Lastly, Absalom is just another KO option. Really, Gecko Moria is just a more grindy and graveyard-intensive variant of Sakazuki. Gecko Moria has a lot of the same strengths, but with a few new weaknesses. It's not as consistent as Sakazuki, Also note that this card is likely going to have cards hit on the ban list in the future, so beware. Personally, I do prefer Moria over Sakazuki. Moria is also on my recommendation list of new player picks. It's a touch more forgiving than Sakazuki, and it's still a valid entry point to the meta. It is very expensive, running the exact same core as Sakazuki, so it'll be around 350. Play this if you want to go straight into competitive. There are two meta pured yellow decks this format, Katakuri and Enel. It's close, but Katakuri is likely the better option thanks to the new cards introduced in OP6. Katakuri is all about surviving until late game, and then beating your opponent to death with the most obnoxious top end in the game, the two Big Moms. 7-drop Big Mom gives our opponent a simple choice, either burn a life or heal us 1. If we do it right, it'll always be heal 1 life. 10-drop Big Mom does both. Against this deck, an opponent is always on a timer and will not be having a good time. To stall for late game, we have a variety of other options. We have free blockers like Sanji, we have free units like Kikunojo, who's also a heal on KO by the way, and we have stroke-inducing events like 200 million Volts of Maru. This deck should be composed of approximately 50 to 60% triggers, which leaves our opponent to feel punished for progressing the game by attacking our life. Fair warning, this deck is good, but largely dependent on luck. No triggers versus all triggers is a completely different game. Price-wise, the deck is also a bit weird. If you decide you want to run 8-drop Katakuri, then this is the most expensive deck in the game. However, there is a question of if Katakuri is an optimal choice to run in this format. I think it's best at 2, but it really is debatable. Plus, in order to make this guide the most accessible to players, I've opted to show a build that does not run Katakuri. This list I'm showing you should be purchasable for less than $200. I hope this helps some of you who want to build yellow, but can't pay for Bandai's failure at product distribution. It also helps me recommend it to new players, which I do. This deck is very easy and almost plays itself. I mean, 7-drop Big Mom literally outsources the decision making to your opponent. This deck is an easy intro to competitive if you don't want to sweat. Enel is a deck about setting up a grind position, then out-resourcing your opponent for a victory. While Katakuri has to fight desperately for an early advantage to win late, Enel is okay with quickly dropping to 1 life, since an opponent still needs to set up enough to actually push through that double final life. The deck's top end is more focused on healing you and keeping that 1 life. 9-drop Yamato is both a heal and a removal. 8-drop Katakuri is optional healing or removal. And of course, we still play the false choice 7-drop Big Mom. Trigger-wise, this deck is a bit more interesting since we get to play more outside the Big Mom package. Impact is some absurdly good removal and a free damage late game. Kazuki Hiyori lets us stack our last life, leading to the most toxic scenarios. And we run Charlotte Cracker for some absurd trigger plays. Overall, your deck should be composed of a higher 60 to 65% triggers. Enel is a fantastic deck that is preferred over Katakuri by Western players. However, it does come with a much steeper price tag, over $400. Between this increased price tag and a more nuanced playstyle, Enel doesn't make my list of new player recommendations, but it is still a great deck for a particular type of player this format. Primarily, Yamato is an aggro deck. Yamato has double strike on leader, so pressure can be quick and early. Supporting this is a variety of cards like Nami, who turns that leader's double strike into double strike banish. We also have 200 million Volts of Maru for a clear swing at life. The deck's top end primarily consists of Hody Jones, who rests any 2 units and is Rush himself. Paying 1 life is irrelevant when you have game. The full aggro playstyle runs into problems, since quite a few decks will just take the hit, then use the resources from life to set up counter plays. So of course, this deck needs other options. Kazuki Momosuke is a great play for more life and to reuse your best 2Ks. Kikunojo lets you heal 1 on KO, and Satori is a 2K trigger unit. You can even fully commit to a defensive build, primarily by playing 8-drop Captain Kid and building a fortress. This is great, but a bit pricey and in my opinion, not optimized against the best decks. It's important to understand that Yamato leader is the win condition. A lot of decks synergize around the leader, but this deck is the leader. It's why there are so many other options to build around with. This deck is on my list of new player recommendations. It's straightforward and very likely to be cheap, mostly consisting of cards from the newest set. It does depend on where prices settle and on what build you choose. I will say, I do think that Land of Wano just has the most fun cards in the game. Vinsmoke Reiju is a deck all about tacking out smaller units into bigger powered up versions of the same unit. Since this works from either graveyard or hand, it turns this deck into a cycling machine. Most builds tend to be more aggressive, leveraging the low to the ground options. This deck wants to cycle cards with Reiju, both the leader skill and the 4-drop. This deck can also use Kaya and Queen as a backup play for cycling. The deck can also use Vinsmoke Ichiji for offensive pressure throughout the game, and Vinsmoke Niji for offensive power early. The deck's big combo is based around Vinsmoke Judge, who lets us reset Vinsmoke units we've already played from trash. It's an insane line that fully restocks your board with massive units. Honestly, this deck is weaker than the other meta decks. It can have issues consistently setting up combos, and it can just get blown out by the problematic meta. It's likely only taking top spots for two very big reasons. It's popular and cheap. Since this deck is also solid, it's on my recommendation list for new players. For you budget players, Queen is technically optional, although strongly recommended. The weakest deck on the meta deck section is Whitebeard. Whitebeard as a deck does two main things. It has a leader with 6k base and 6 life. This messes with an opponent's Dawn management, lets you swing high for free, and lets you take attacks for free. In other words, your leader is free value you can build a deck around. Secondly, Edward Newgate is about abusing amazing red cards and sitting on value. Putting a life into hand each turn is actually good for you, since an opponent can't deny you the value spiral. Marcos just sit on the board for practically free, since an opponent can't remove them unless they have non-KO removal, and Whitebeard and Ace provide an easy defensive and offensive finisher respectively. Not to mention all of the searchers this deck has. Whitebeard has fallen out of relevancy, and was strongly considered to get cut from the meta deck section. Really, it's only held together by a few sparse tops. In fact, long-term fans of my channel might notice that my description of the deck is verbatim taken from my last One Piece deck breakdown. This is because Whitebeard hasn't received new support or benefits from any new generic red cards. It's a great deck, but just understand you're getting last meta's sloppy seconds, which is why it's not recommended to new players like last time. For new player picks, I'm looking for a few things. First and foremost is affordability. Most decks on here are reasonably priced entry points for the game. Secondarily is meta relevance. The decks I recommend should be playable at a local level and even have the ability to survive in competitive. Some decks like Katakuri and Gecko Moria aren't that cheap, but do override the first criteria since they're great competitive entry points. Lastly, the decks I'm picking should be able to have lasting usage into later formats, either in the pieces they transfer onwards, like with Belo Betty and the Dragon, or with the entire deck still being viable, such as Yamato and Gecko Moria. Belo Betty is a balls-to-the-wall aggro rush deck. The deck consists of a ton of low-cost units that get benefits from having high attack, and the leader busts everything practically for free. Emporia Ivankov lets you play units for free, Lindbergh lets you KO opponents' units, and Karasu lets you decrease the opponent's leader's power. This deck is very fast, and tends to either win or lose very quickly. The deck also has the issue of being vulnerable to enough removal, so unless you navigate the meta very well, it's gonna be rough. The deck is absurdly cheap, being less than $100, and even having some builds going for less than $50. The Revolution Army archetype is also going to be used in the upcoming Monkey D. Dragon deck, releasing an OP7. I will say that this deck is likely improved by running Charlotte Cracker, but it's a $50 package for a minor boost that's not relevant for Revolution Army decks going into OP7. Use your judgment when building the deck how you want. Here's the worst recommendation, it's Nami. An uninteractive self-deck-out deck that I'm only including on the list because it's so cheap. You do things like loot Kaya and Mr. 2, spam Sanji's Pilaf, and just win if you get enough draw triggers. You don't really ever attack the opponent's life, or really interact with them at all. This is Solitaire plain and simple. If you liked Mystic Mine and Yu-Gi-Oh!, or Stacks and Magic the Gathering, this deck is made for you. It's kind of meh right now, but it gets better going into OP7, and the deck is always playable. So have fun, you monsters. Green Film Uta is a fun leader based around abusing the Green Film engine and a few staple cards. The deck abuses the Film Nami Searcher and Uta leader skill to try and get ahead massively in hand advantage. Secondarily, the deck uses Film Brook and Film Luffy to spam the board out with cost-efficient units. Lastly, the deck uses a variety of staples such as 9-drop Zoro, Eustass Captain Kidd, and Don Quixote Don Flamingo to close out games. These change depending on your build. Power-wise, this deck is very okay. It won the Japanese Nationals despite the heavy Sakazuki meta, so a good player can do a lot with this deck. If you want a deck to cheaply build from a starter deck, then this isn't it, because Bandai messed it up. Bandai just didn't reprint the main searcher for this deck, so Nami's now a $25 to $30 card. Plus, a ton of the optional cards for this deck are locked behind event-exclusive promos that Bandai just didn't distribute. Plus, due to the lack of product in general, Eustass Captain Kidd is way too expensive. So, what should be my favorite recommendation on this list is just kind of okay. Still a very fun deck, and one I personally enjoy, but way more pricey than it should have been for what it is. Here's a section of decks that aren't meta, nor the best choices for new players to pick up. I do, however, stand by every deck here as a great deck to pick up and start playing for fun. Red Purple Trafalgar Law is a fairly strong aggro combo leader that has the unique gimmick of both removing an opponent's unit and then playing your own unit for free at the same time. The deck commonly sits at low Dawn and does cheeky combos to throw out extra damage and maintain a stable amount of Dawn. In OP6, this deck gets to take advantage of new cards such as Vinsmoke Reiju for reloading hand size, Hitokiri Kamazo for a synergistic 2k, and Raise Max as a secondary Gordon, improving consistency dramatically. The deck is a great pickup if you're looking to play one of the leaders from the 3-captain structure deck. However, it's the most pricey out of the 3, needing Gordon and preferring to run green. This deck is looking like it'll be a consistent rogue deck continuing into OP7, so pick it up if it sounds interesting. My favorite deck is Kinemon. Kinemon is a unit spam deck that's all about overwhelming the opponent with simply faster options. The gimmick is to use simple cost reductions and unit 2-for-1s for massive early game pressure. I do deck profiles for this leader regularly, so I recommend checking one out. Basically, you can play 5-cost Yamato for 3 to counter every yellow deck outright. You can use Mihawk and Ryuma to counter any black deck by playing more units than they can physically retire. And you can use Doflamingo, Hody Jones, and Okiku to counter anything else. It's such a fun deck to play and build around. It just takes some time to understand that you're actually just trying to play more units than an opponent can physically handle. The deck is more expensive than it should be, thanks to Yamato fetching a $40 price tag. Outside of that, the deck should be cheap. Kinemon is a 10 out of 10 leader. Arlong was a leader forgotten about on release. However, with 3+ waves of support at this point, he's now certifiably just okay. What Arlong does is he gets to play a 4-cost or lower unit with a trigger effect for the cheap cost of putting some Dawn on him. This creates a really aggressive deck, and 2 of the best colors for triggers. We've got new powerful trigger units like Kikunojo and Arlong, and toxic classes like Kurobi, who just rest any one unit. This leaves the deck to have one of the best early games and lives in the game. However, it does suffer from not really having a good top end and only having 4 life. I just recommend this one to anyone who likes fun, fast decks. It's also very cheap. The hardest deck to pilot on this list is Rebecca, a slow, grindy setup-based strategy that has some of the craziest tools in the game. Rebecca is a Dressrosa deck that has the unique gimmick of getting to add a filtered Dressrosa card from the top of your deck to hand each turn, at the cost of this leader being unable to attack. This deck can best utilize the Rebecca Graveyard Recursion blocker, and it also contains Kairos, who is a practically impossible to kill attacker. Most recently, this deck makes use of the Gecko Moria combo engine, leading to some absurd scenarios. Not being able to attack with leader means the deck is inherently behind tempo, so every choice you make has to be perfect. And trust me, you get a lot of choices in this deck. This is the coolest way to play black engine cards, but just know that everyone will be mad at you for going to time every round at locals. Even still, I recommend this deck. Iceburg is a forgotten about leader with the fun gimmick of being able to play a 5-cost or less Galley Law type card from hand for Dawn -1 every turn. This leads to one of the strongest early games in the game. Not only that, this deck has serious built-in ramp thanks to Poly and Galley Law Company. What held this deck back is the weaker purple support on release and the fact that this is a 1-set deck. It leaves a lot to be desired. However, with the new purple support in Starter Deck 10 and OP5, we can actually make a terrifying monster. Eustass Captain Kidd is free synergy with leader skill, Turn Skip Monkey D. Luffy is a surprisingly synergistic win condition, as he doesn't stop your leader from playing more units, and OP6 gives us Vinsmoke Reiju, who can reload our hand after popping off. We've got actual good options. I'd recommend you build this deck. It's very cheap and very fun, despite how much of a meme it is. A secondary option to play film decks is Red Purple Uta, an option people have been waiting for since the failure of Purple Shanks released back in Starter Deck 5. Red Purple Uta combines purple staples with the red film top end, getting to abuse fun win conditions like 10 cost film Shanks. The deck also gets unique recursion options like Guild Tesoro. It's all held together by how the leader gives both easy character removal and ramping at the same time. Red Purple Uta is a fun, mostly budget deck that has quite a lot of room for experimentation. The colors red and purple are just wide open with what you can get away with. This deck is unsolved, so a good player can do a lot to strengthen it up. I'd recommend this to anyone who just wants a fun deck to mess with. Lastly, it's my boy, Useless Captain Kidd. It forgoes all reasonable strategy in late game plays to just punch the opponent in the face. The leader has a weird gimmick of being able to don -1 to gain an extra 2k power when attacking, but the leader has 5 life, but the leader is a 4k base during your turn until you get to 3 or low life. This leader requires Nami and Haruta to force this deck into being a 5k base. Outside of that, this leader gets to abuse the fact that he had a Dawn minus ability on demand, letting the deck abuse skills like Killer, Wire, and block your Eustass Captain Kidd consistently the turn they are played. The trick to this deck is being super aggressive and using leader skill just enough to obliterate an opponent without destroying your own options. You will still rarely ever go to 10 Dawn. In OP6, we get 2 new pieces of support. A new 2k Hitokiri Kamazo, and the new Vinsmoke Reiju for extra draw power. Thank God the new 2k isn't named Killer, so we can actually search it with Killer. It's not a lot of new support for this deck, but it's still very helpful for what this deck is. This deck is my personal recommendation from the 3 Captains deck, and it's very slept on. So you can surprise most players with a cheesy win. Alright, so that's my deck choice guide for OP6. I hope y'all enjoyed it. If you did, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss my future One Piece content. Plus, I cover a whole lot of other card games with some very interesting topics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.